announced earlier this year that top AEW star Chris Jericho would be a guest on Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions on the WWE Network, the wrestling world lost its collective mind. Though Y2J has a long and documented history with WWE, his appearance was still unexpected, considering that he works for what is now basically the competition. Unexpected, perhaps, but not unprecedented, as wrestling history is full of examples of performers working for different organizations while under contract to a promotion. And that extends to WWE themselves, who aren't strangers to having their contracted personnel showing up in other places for a variety of different reasons. And we're not talking the token mid-carder to appease someone who's owed a favor either, because some of the biggest stars in the industry have been sent out when the time calls for it. Sometimes those top stars are not only top-tier players, but also in possession of WWE title gold too, making the situations even more bizarre. They don't come up very often and happen with less and less frequency as the years go by, but seeing a fully fledged WWE superstar taking bumps at the local bingo hall or showing their face on a rival group's pay-per-view is something we all get a kick out of. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WWE stars who appeared in other promotions while under contract. Join us. Number 10, Daniel Bryan for Dragon Gate USA in 2010. Daniel Bryan was a busy boy in the summer of 2010, competing in the first season of NXT The Game Show, debuting on WWE TV proper as a member of the Nexus, then immediately getting fired for choking ring announcer Justin Roberts with his own tie and hitting the indie scene once more. Some believed that would be it for D. Bry in WWE, but he returned not too long after as a member of Team WWE against the Nexus at SummerSlam 2010, and he's been there ever since. The move to let him go was essentially PR, a way to let sponsors know that World Wrestling Entertainment were committed to a PG product, and anyone that went against that would suffer the consequences. Once the heat had died down though, Bryan was invited back into the fold. The only snag was that he still had independent dates to honor, but WWE were happy for him to fulfill his bookings while under contract to them. This led to the novel situation where the man of his word wrestled for Dragon Gate USA a mere 6 days after capturing the WWE US title. On the shows, Bryan beat Dragon Gate's Yamato and an eye-catching up-and-comer named Jon Moxley. Number 9, Brock Lesnar UFC return in 2016. WWE loaning their talent to another organization where they can influence the outcome is one thing, but putting their guys in wildly unpredictable situations is certainly not the norm. Not that anything Brock Lesnar does is normal, of course, but still, WWE giving him the green light to return to UFC almost 5 years after his last fight was a risky proposition. If the Beast Incarnate beat Mark Hunt at the UFC 200 pay-per-view, fantastic! It makes both Brock and WWE look great, right? But what if he got dominated, or even worse, knocked out or forced to submit in decisive fashion? Anything can happen in the octagon, and Hunt was no scrub, being a top 10 ranked heavyweight at the time. After everything WWE had invested in Brock and how they had sacrificed pretty much all of their top guys in order to make him look invincible, a crushing MMA loss could seriously hamper his pro wrestling aura. Thankfully for Lesnar and Vince McMahon's company, the former UFC champion took care of business and beat Hunt via unanimous decision, a result that was ultimately overturned to a no contest when Brock tested positive for a banned substance during a post-fight screening. Probably IcoPro. Number 8, Jerry Lawler, ECW invasion in 1997. Years before ECW formed the alliance with WCW in the invasion against WWE, Paul Heyman's renegade band of misfits staged their own mini-invasion of WWE to both add something different to WWE programming and promote their first pay-per-view, Barely Legal. WWE fans got a taste of what ECW had to offer, and once the whole thing was over, probably thought that was that. They probably didn't see WWE's response. After Tommy Dreamer had finally beaten perennial rival Raven at WrestlePalooza 97, the lights went out, and when they came back on, Jerry the King Lawler was standing there, drawing positively nuclear heat from the Philadelphia throng. Lawler helped Rob Van Dam, Sabu, and Bill Alfonso beat down Dreamer and other ECW favourites before cutting a blistering promo that generated yet more heat. It was a dynamite angle, part of a brief storyline where the King was supposedly sent to ECW in order to steal their best talent and kill the company. It worked so well because Lawler genuinely didn't like Paul Heyman, ECW wrestlers, or their product, a fact that he made clear on WWE television previously. He wrestled a couple of matches during his short stay, including a singles match with Dreamer at Hardcore Heaven, which he lost. Number 7, Tazz, ECW title victory in 2000. Back to ECW now, as a prodigal son returned for an unprecedented situation that saw a WWE contracted wrestler beat a WCW contracted wrestler for an ECW title on an ECW show. Tazz had left ECW for WWE in late 1999 and made his television debut by beating Kurt Angle at the 2000 Royal Rumble. Mike Awesome wasn't too far behind him out the door, though he left for WCW while still reigning as ECW Heavyweight Champion. This, naturally, was a bit of a problem and resulted in a tense situation that required the cooperation of all three promotions to remedy it. Eric Bischoff sent Awesome back to drop the strap, and Vince McMahon lent the Human Suplex Machine for a surprise appearance, the two meeting on the April 8, 2000 ECW show in Buffalo, New York. Tazz beat Awesome very quickly before Mike hightailed it out of there, wary of the repercussions he potentially faced for his covert defection. Tazz came back to the ECW arena 2 weeks later, though not before doing the job for Triple H on SmackDown while holding the title, because why wouldn't that be a thing that happened, to drop it to Tommy Dreamer. Number 6, CM Punk, Ring of Honor 2006. By early 2006, Ring of Honor had begun to lose much of the talent that helped grow the company into an independent powerhouse as wrestlers began signing with WWE and TNA. While the CM Punks and Samoa Joes of the world went to pastures new, ROH were at least able to create new stars. Unfortunately for their February 11th unscripted 2 show in Long Island, New York, they weren't able to book many of those advertised, as a giant snowstorm had halted travel and thrown booking plans into disarray. When the weather situation didn't look like it was going to improve, the company began to reach out for help and managed to secure the services of one of their biggest successes. The Second City Saint made a shocking return to the company and wound up teaming with Bryan Danielson against Adam Pearce and Jimmy Rave in the main event. Punk hadn't yet debuted on WWE's version of ECW at the time, but he was still signed to a WWE contract and working in developmental territory OVW. Punk wanted to do the promotion that put him on the map as solid, and his appearance was very well received by the fans in attendance. Not only did he wrestle on the night, but he put the work in too, wrestling around 30 minutes and putting on a real show for those in attendance. Number 5, Christian, TNA SLAMMIVERSARY 2012. SLAMMIVERSARY 2012 was a special night for TNA. They were celebrating, against all odds, a decade of being in existence, drew their biggest domestic crowd to that point for the show, and named Sting as the first inductee into their Hall of Fame. They also managed to get Christian Cage back for the event a few years after Captain Charisma had left them and rejoined WWE. Now, the Intercontinental Champion didn't wrestle on the show or anything like that, but showed up to give a speech and announce the #1 moment in TNA history as voted for by the fans, which was Sting returning to team with him against Jeff Jarrett and Monty Brown in the main event of Final Resolution 2006. So, how did the whole thing come about? Well, Vince McMahon owed Dixie Carter a favor after she gave the okay for Ric Flair to be inducted into the 2012 WWE Hall of Fame as a member of the Four Horsemen, while the Nature Boy was still under contract to TNA. Christian himself was honored to be asked to appear, as he felt that it signified his contributions truly meant something to the company, though did confess to thinking it was a rib when he first received the call. Number 4, Hulk Hogan, New Japan 1993. Before he was established as the guy in WWE in the mid-80s, Hulk Hogan was a pretty damn big deal in Japan. A former IWGP Heavyweight Champion for the prestigious New Japan Pro Wrestling, the Hulkster could have been the top gaijin in the land of the rising sun for years to come had he not chosen to say his prayers and take his vitamins stateside. The bond between Hogan and New Japan head honcho Antonio Inoki remained strong enough that the company were able to use him in May of 1993 while he was holding the WWE title. Not only that, but Hogan was booked against IWGP champion the Great Muta in a dream match with all sorts of political implications at the Wrestling Dontaku show in front of 55,000 people. It was non-title, naturally, but Hogan got the pin with his old Axe Bomb finisher after Muta had kicked out of the leg drop of doom. That wasn't the most controversial part of his excursion, however, with most reports making a big fuss about how Hogan had referred to the WWE title as nothing but a toy, while calling the IWGP title a real championship belt worth having. Vince loved that, obviously, and Hogan dropped the WWE title to Yokozuna not long after. Number 3, Bret Hart on the Terry Funk retirement show in 1997. Terry Funk retirement shows are moments to savour because they only come around every 3 months or so. They're also nights to remember because you never know who is going to show up from the Funker's past. He's wrestled everyone, everywhere over the course of many decades, and really, who doesn't love Terry Funk? The man from the Double Cross Ranch presented what I'm sure he thought would be his final bow in his hometown of Amarillo, Texas in September 1997. The event featured indie workers, Japanese stars, and performers from ECW and WWE, with the ECW World TV and Heavyweight titles being defended and Mankind squaring off with Sabu in an inter-promotional bout. It was headlined by Funk meeting WWE champion Bret Hart in a no DQ match, and the two even argued about who would go over in the end, the Hitman wanting to give Terry a sentimental victory, while Funk was adamant that he do the honours for Bret. The latter got his way and Hart got the win, but that was immaterial in the grand scheme of things. Other occasions where talent from the Big Three shared the same locker room during the Monday Night Wars include the Bryan Pillman Memorial shows, which ran between 1998 and 2001. Number 2, Eddie Guerrero on the Indies and in Ring of Honor in 2002. When Eddie Guerrero was released in late 2001 after receiving a DUI following a stint in rehab, he knew that he had to rebuild his life both personally and professionally. Latino Heat was a man in demand as he hit the independent and international scenes, working for anyone who would meet his asking price and going back on tour with New Japan. One of the companies Eddie worked for was a new group called Ring of Honor. Guerrero wrestled on their very first show, titled The Era of Honor Begins, losing to Super Crazy. His performances on this show and others, coupled with reports of his improved conduct, convinced WWE to give him another chance, and they offered him a contract to return in March of 2002. Eddie was back in the big time, but he still had obligations that he intended on fulfilling, which he did with WWE's blessing. So he went back to the rec centers for a handful of matches against the likes of CM Punk and Colt Cabana, and made one final stop in ROH, teaming with the Amazing Red to beat the SAT, while he was Intercontinental Champion no less, before being given a rousing send-off from the appreciative roster. Number 1, The Undertaker, Michinoku Pro in 1997. Perhaps no character in the history of WWE has been as well protected as The Undertaker. He's engaged in his fair share of silliness, sure, but more often than not, the dead man has been booked to look dominant and for his mystique to remain intact. It may surprise some of you then to know that Taker sometimes wrestled for companies other than WWE during his 30 years of employment there. He occasionally cropped up in the affiliated Memphis and Smoky Mountain wrestling territories and was permitted to work a Yokozuna tribute show in 2001, but the most interesting example of the Phenom plying his trade in a non-WWE ring is when he travelled to Japan for a match with a familiar face in 1997. Just a few days after competing in the classic first Hell in a Cell match against Shawn Michaels on pay-per-view, Taker took on former WWE star Hakushi on Michinoku Pro's 4th anniversary show. It was a spectacle of a match and certainly a unique thing to see Undertaker do his thing in that environment. As far as why the match came about, one can only assume it was the result of a talent exchange agreement, since Taka Michinoku and the great Sasuke from Michinoku Pro had worked for WWE earlier that year.